I am very much in the camp of grassroots. That's where my heart is. That's what I want to support. I think it's important to get out of your comfort zone. I think it's really easy for Bitcoiners to find Bitcoin and get excited about it and then kind of stay in their comfort zone and not push themselves to learn a little bit more, be open to new perspectives.
It's such an interesting paradox about Bitcoin because it is this internet money that lives 100% online, but then you have these physical anchors, obviously with mining being the core anchor, but then just meeting Bitcoiners. And, when people ask me, how do I get involved or what should I do to learn about Bitcoin? I always say, just go to your local meetup. Sweet. Yeah. Happy to just kick it off. Welcome back to another episode of Medium of Exchange podcast, where we talk about Bitcoin and Bitcoin adoption. Really excited to have Kiki on the show today, who is working on all sorts of really cool projects around grassroots adoption and just overall Bitcoin circular economies. So Kiki, please I'm going to hand it over to you and let us know I know where you're calling in from, but let the people know where you're calling in from, kind of some of the special things that you're working on.
Awesome. Thank you. It's super exciting to be here. I remember when you guys first posted that you were doing this podcast, and I was like, yes, this is what I want to see. So I'm Kiki. I'm originally from Canada, from the Toronto area. I left Canada back in 2021 and spent 6 months in the south of Mexico and then moved to El Salvador, which is where my Bitcoin kind of journey and working in this space really accelerated. I started learning about Bitcoin in 2020, but it was actually being in El Salvador and using it in person that made it really cement in my mind that this is exactly where I wanted to focus my efforts on. And so right now I'm kind of wearing a couple of different hats, doing a couple of different things. My primary responsibility and the thing that lights me up every day is working on Adopting Bitcoin, which is a conference held in El Salvador in November every year. We're going into our fifth, and there's so many goodies. I'm sure we'll talk about them. I'm super excited about it. I also joined my first Bitcoin team in January on the board of directors. So with my first Bitcoin, we do a lot of Bitcoin education around the world. It was headquartered in El Salvador, started in El Salvador, but every new place that I go, I meet new people who are teaching the diploma, which is really exciting, all around the world. And I co-founded the Bitcoin Farmers Market in El Salvador as well. I'm not actively involved in the organization there anymore, but it is, I think, a really amazing project and will continue to thrive. It's essentially a farmers market where all of the vendors accept Bitcoin, so anyone can come in and buy their goods in Bitcoin as well.
That's awesome, because that is spreading grassroots adoption, and that's actually where we met at Grassroots Bitcoin back in April at the unconference, the Meet Premier Bitcoin, and just such good work that they're doing with the diploma and the node network and all that sorts of stuff. And I want to kind of start off by taking a little bit of a step back in terms of what you were sharing of growing up in Canada and then exploring the south of Mexico and ending up in El Salvador. And right around that time was when the announcements of Bitcoin becoming legal tender was really permeating into the scene. So can you just walk us through what you were working on before and how you ended up being oh, actually El Salvador seems like a cool place to eventually move to and start building from the ground up, at really the beginning to what now is people just using Bitcoin all the time?
Yeah. So my background is in the restaurant industry in Toronto. I started working when I was really young. My dad worked in restaurants from when he was really young, and he just thought it was a very formative experience and gives you a lot of character. So I got into it really young and fell in love with the industry. I'm kind of a people person. I like in-person, physical experiences. So I did that for quite a while, but I started working a lot really young, which meant that I didn't really have time to travel or learn about anything outside of my industry. I love what I did, but it kind of stunted my growth, and it also stunted my financial education growth because I wasn't really saving that much. I was kind of living paycheck to paycheck. I would save a little bit here and there, but it just wasn't something that what seemed accessible to me. And I had no knowledge, and I was super overwhelmed by the idea of personal saving, investments, everything like that. Me 10 years ago to think that I'm in this space and in this place now is unfathomable. You know what I mean? But in my role there, in the restaurant industry, I started managing as well. So I was managing other people's money. And that gave me an insight as to like, okay, maybe I need to start thinking about this a little bit more. And someone that I was working with introduced me to Bitcoin, my ex-partner. So I had heard about it before, but never really took it seriously. Didn't feel like I had the time to understand what it was. But because this person was interested in it, that made me interested in it. And then in March 2020, when we got locked down, it was like, there's no better time to like learn about this thing. And instead of going like deep dive into it, because I kind of tried to do that, I've always been a big Twitter user. And so I looked up Bitcoin on Twitter and I was like, whoa, what is all of this? So I kind of like decided to take a step back and think more about just money in general and finances in general. And I did a couple of online courses about like macroeconomics and stuff like that, which is where I learned what fractional reserve banking was. And I thought, okay, so like I knew there was a problem. I just didn't really know what it was. Like, let's get into this more. And that kind of set the groundwork. And then because we were locked down, I was still working in restaurants a little bit, but I kind of slowly transitioned into working online, doing like sales for a POS company. So that gave me a little bit more insight into like how the tech powering restaurants worked. And one of the major factors when you're in that world is, of course, payments and the fees that come with payments, right? So as I was learning about Bitcoin and people potentially using Bitcoin, you know, as money, I was seeing these companies that were charging like crazy rates for credit card fees and stuff like this in an industry that already has like very, very, very thin margins as it is. And I was like, wow, this is like an amazing solution, especially in places that have a lot of tourists and there's like currency exchange involved. But I like still at that point didn't have the knowledge or maybe even the confidence to like put two and two together. But I got kind of sick of being locked down in Toronto. It was cold and dark and just like, you know, I always wanted an opportunity to travel and that seemed like an interesting time to do it. Mexico was open for people to come and go to. So we went to Mexico first for 6 months in a city called Oaxaca in the south. It was like a wonderful experience, but we didn't really meet any other Bitcoiners or any other like-minded people, so it didn't really feel like the place to stay. And I remember sitting kind of trying to work, but also having the live stream for the first year of adopting Bitcoin going on a computer on the side and tuning into that and seeing what was going on in El Salvador. And that's when like the idea came to mind, okay, if we're not going to stay here, maybe we should consider this place as an option. And when we first went, which was in April of 2022, I had no idea that like things were going to turn out the way that they did and that I was going to stay for 3 years and that sort of thing. It was kind of like, okay, let's check this out and see. And I remember my first Bitcoin purchase, which made me really nervous because at the time I was like, oh my God, like I've been saving this thing and like I have so much respect for it. And now I'm like spending it on a bottle of water. I'm going to regret this, right? Like that classic situation. But it just became more and more normal. And then more services were available for me to pay in Bitcoin. And at the time I was still getting paid Canadian dollars into a Canadian bank account. So trying to get like US dollars in cash was doable, but like not a pleasant experience and expensive. It just was a natural progression. And then I took some time off of work and I thought, okay, I'm going to start volunteering or like just trying to work on different projects and seeing what comes of it. Put a lot of time and energy into the farmers market, which led to the opportunity to start working with adopting Bitcoin last year in 2024. And this year, I'm kind of running the head of operations and joined my first Bitcoin teams. Hopefully that covers it mostly.
No, that's amazing. And Jason has extensive background in payments and can go deep into the technicals and all that sorts of fun stuff of how these small businesses are getting squeezed. So Jason, I'm sure you have like a bunch of questions that just came up based off.
Okay, I do have a question though, which is, let's go back to that first transaction. So yeah. Tell me, okay, so you bought a bottle of water, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And how did that go? How did that feel? I mean, you've come a long way.
Yeah.
But tell us about that first one.
Yeah, it was honestly scary. Like I said, I had this moment of, no, now I'm like really doing it. I'm really spending it. Am I going to regret this? Do I regret it already? What's going on here kind of thing. But I was kind of like, okay, it's a bottle of water. It's $1. I know that dollar is going to be worth a lot more in the future, but right now I'm participating in this thing that I came here for. So let's just try it out. And that was also like my first time using the Lightning Network, which I had, heard about and seen about on Twitter, but first interaction. It was in a custodial platform, so like the payment was fine, it was smooth, everything was fine. But yeah, it did instill a little bit of fear, but like it was like every little purchase like made it feel a little bit more comfortable. And then being there, especially at that time, which was like beginning of the rainy season or summer in 2022, there was still people who were coming to El Salvador at that time, but not nearly as much as it is now. So the community, the Bitcoiners who had like gone there or were staying there long term or living there, was really small and tight knit. And that was good in a way for my experiences, because I was able to like ask questions and not feel like, I don't know, like feel like I was asking dumb questions. There was always people around to help, and they were people that I like trusted, and we could sit and like have these conversations. And anytime a new like restaurant or service provider announced that they were accepting Bitcoin, it was like, oh, okay, let's go support these guys. Oh, let's go support these guys. And it just became more and more normal, to the point that now I'm like, when I go places and I'm like, yeah, I have to like pay in fiat. I don't have any fiat, so I guess I got to solve that problem now.
So,
Spear.
so I love it. So your number go up. You were concerned, you know, the value of this Bitcoin is going to go up in the future. I know that. And so it sounds like that was kind of one of the big concerns. But you also mentioned, like in the very beginning, when you first started, I wrote this down, using it in person is what really cemented it in my mind. So tell us about that. Like you mentioned the word participation. You're no longer just hodling. You're not just saving in Bitcoin. You're actually, you know, participating in this new economy. Why?
Yeah.
For you?
Yeah, I think the thing that like really helped cement it was the fact that like El Zonte, especially at that time, it's changed a lot. There's been a lot of like upgrades, construction, that sort of thing. But at that time, and especially in rainy season, it's a really small surf town, and it hasn't always been the most well kept. And not everybody who lives there, like, well, actually most locals, like they don't have a lot of money. They don't have a lot of access to financial tools, to education, that sort of thing. So one thing that I like tried to remind myself is like, I'm parting with like my sats right now, but I'm like giving them to somebody who may turn around and change it to fiat, but they also may save it or save a portion of it, and this could like really drastically increase their quality of life as well. So it felt like a very like just helpful exchange for the recipient, and that was something that kind of like eased my mind about it, I guess, and made me feel a little bit more open to it. And just like the reaction too on both sides, like when you're sending your first transaction or your first transactions, or when you're receiving them, like it's a fun experience. Like you can theorize about these things all the time, but when you get the check mark come up on your phone in your wallet and you're like, oh, cool, I did it. Like that was fun. What next? You know, it's a positive feeling, and that just plays into like wanting to do it more.
No, 100%. And I love the just following what's going on in El Salvador as a case study for this, because I don't know what the population of El Salvador is off the top of my head, but like it's a really small country, obviously. And they, you know, they were in this position of, we're getting screwed by the IMF, and, you know, the currency was not performing anywhere close to the US dollar, which, you know, I've privileged enough to have easy access to. So let's just try to do something different. When everybody's zigging, let's zag. I'm sure there have been some bumps in the road, and I've seen some bumps in the road, and I would love to hear, you know, what's some maybe that you've experienced, but also on the flip side, when you look at El Salvador now on like the global scale or the global stage in 2025 versus back in 2019, 2020, it is night and day of looking at that country as a way to not only attract tourists, but also increase and improve the infrastructure that you were talking about. And then we can start to even go into like the I guess juxtaposition of adopting Bitcoin and what that means, and then your work with the farmers market and what that also means for adopting Bitcoin in not the conference sense, but just in the practical sense. And I think that's kind of like where I get a lot of interest of seeing and following along, and why I feel that pull to eventually come and visit El Salvador, is because like it is the like test use case of what a lot of Bitcoiners see as a hyper Bitcoinized world, and really moving towards that point where we're like, oh, it is gradually then suddenly. So I know that was a kind of a longer form of a question, but like, what has that experience been like, both good and bad, of living through that transformation?
Yeah. It's funny because when you like, if you have this question and you go online, whether it's like a simple Google search or on Twitter or whatever, you're gonna get like an answer in every part of the spectrum. You're gonna have people who say like, no, it's not even real, like I could not use Bitcoin at all, no one uses it, blah blah blah. And then you're gonna get people who are like, no, I live completely 100% on Bitcoin. And the reality is like probably somewhere in between. It depends on the individual, of course. And if it's a priority for you, then it's very easy to make happen. But if it's not a priority for you, if you're not seeking out opportunities to like spend Bitcoin, then like it is what it is. I think one of the major things about adoption in El Salvador that I've learned from speaking to Salvadorans is when they were dollarized after they had the Salvadoran colon, and then they were dollarized. And that was like, from what I understand, like a pretty painful experience for the economy, right? And so people had like a relatively fresh fear of that sort of change. And then when Bitcoin came into the fold, it kind of came out of nowhere, including to most Salvadorans. And there are probably like very much still a lot of people, a lot of Salvadorans who are fearful or confused, or some people are even upset that it's still something that's like a part of their country. But I understand where that comes from, knowing the context of their financial history and also just like the instability of the country, right? We said that like, I think the people in El Salvador who have like the skepticism are the people who are going to end up being like become evangelists of Bitcoin, because they're really thinking about it deeply, kind of thing. On the other side, there's plenty of people who just started kind of using Bitcoin because they really supported the president and they are very proud of their country. But those people may have only ever used Chivo and don't actually kind of know what's going on. So I think that the approach of like taking time to understand it and understand what it means to you is like a really important aspect of adoption and giving people the opportunity to. The other thing too is like the educational piece was not introduced at like a state level when Bitcoin was announced, right? And that's like one of the problems that's like really how my first Bitcoin came to be, was to fill that gap. And now there's plenty of offerings both at the state level and in private. But when it first happened, it was a little rocky, of course. Like that's how these things go. Adoption is not like, a simple linear uphill, like up spike, you know what I mean? Like, there's people involved and people are complicated. And this is like a simple technology, but it's also a complicated technology conceptually for a lot of people to understand. And the physicality of it, the tangibility or the lack of tangibility of it for a lot of people, I think is a huge barrier, whether it's people in El Salvador or people anywhere else in the world for that matter. Like that's one of the biggest objections from people. And I get that. You want to have like something physical to represent what's going on, because it's hard to conceptualize with these things sometimes. I have seen the growth of adoption in El Salvador for 3 years, and it like, in spite of things that have happened this year, the IMF deal, etc., it still continues to grow. And the thing that I find that's really interesting and really powerful is it's growing not just in like an institutional way or in like a corporate way or in the center in San Salvador, but it's growing in like communities in the mountains. There's a community called, I believe, that is starting to do some education. There's Chalchuapa, like there's tons of these places that honestly, like if you come and visit, like you're probably never even going to hear about it because they're remote, they're in the mountains, there's no expats there. Sure, there's touristy things to do, but it's kind of like not necessarily on your radar as a tourist. But these things are popping up and growing, and people are educating each other and empowering each other. And I think that that's like the thing to focus on when it comes to the story of Bitcoin in El Salvador right now. Like there is a lot of good stuff happening on the institutional level, but the grassroots efforts is what's like really making a change, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I love that. And because this is with like any transformation or any change, right? Like you can have a top-down approach, which is kind of how it started, right? Like it's like, this is legal tender, businesses need to accept this thing now. But to actually get it to stick and to get people to want to use it, you need to have that more bottom-up grassroots, like, no, wait, this is why you should use this. Because like if I'm just set in my ways of like, I default to Googling things, right? it's like that's just because it's kind of the way that I've been programmed. But now I'm starting to be like, wait, no, I'm actually hearing from other people that I respect and that are really good at, research or whatever, to go to Perplexity or ChatGPT, where I'm like, I need to change my behavior. And a lot of people, we have a sense that we can like change others but not ourselves, if that makes sense. And it's like, no, like you have to start with yourself. So when the grassroots things start to get that acceleration, to your point, it's not linear, and it catches fire, and then people start to say like, oh, this is better for my community, better for my business, better for just my general like way of life. So that's a really, really interesting perspective. Like, thank you for sharing that. That's awesome.
Of course.
Kiki, I want to learn a little bit. I want to double click on the grassroots adoption. I'm very curious. So this week, I'll give you for context of within my life. I work with everyday business owners. And this week, a couple examples, I asked if they have thought about accepting Bitcoin, and they just kind of laugh. And, one, for example, said, or asked why. And they were like, we're old fashioned. We don't know anything about Bitcoin, and we don't need it. Another one said, honey, we're old school. We're lucky we even accept credit cards. And so these are just everyday, business owners here in my community. You got folks in rural communities there. What does discovering something like magic internet money look like on a grassroots ground level for these folks?
I think it's there's a lot of like similar objections that I've heard, even when I've like gone out to a restaurant or something and said, do you accept Bitcoin? The objections are all kind of the same everywhere. But I think the thing that really helps is having somebody that can be looked to as a leader that is active in the community. And that's why it's important for these circular economies, spawn and to grow and to continue to empower other people, and then bring in the next generation of leaders and the next one and the next one. To have somebody who is walking the walk and not just talking the talk, and point to and say, this person seems to know what they're talking about, seems to be successful, seems to be able to answer all my questions, whatever it is. But having somebody who can be pointed to, I think, is like a huge, huge factor. And it's really, really difficult when you are that person and you're kind of feeling alone or isolated in that environment to start. Like at the Grassroots Summit, it was really amazing to hear the efforts that a lot of people are putting in across the US and other places. But like, it takes a lot of energy. At times it takes money, it takes time away from whatever else you have going on in your life to be a leader and to like want to educate people and empower people. But it's like that one spark can grow an entire movement or citadel or community. But again, it kind of comes back to that theme that I've said about the physicality and the physical presence. I think is a huge part of it. And the reality is, in El Salvador, where it's not treated with the capital gains tax, it's a little bit easier to get over the fence, right? The taxation part, I think, for a lot of business owners specifically is something that is really challenging. And I know that there's some amazing solutions coming out right now, whether it's like from like a banking level or from like an accountant level. There are solutions that are coming, and it's amazing to see that. But in El Salvador, like, that's why the law is so powerful, is because you can spend it without worrying about any sort of like repercussions.
Mm-hmm. No,
yeah, it's in the eyes of the government, it is money there,
right?
Which is a huge leg up.
Yeah,
and I know I've said this before on this podcast, but I think it's worth saying again, because like you're seeing it with the payments in the farmers market and just across El Salvador in general. And I think that there's in the quote unquote developed or, developed banking industry of the United States, right? Like, we've seen a big shift towards institutional adoption, especially in the last year or so, where you have corporate treasuries and you have banks starting to figure out how they're going to custody this thing, some in good ways, some in not so good ways of using, third parties and so on and so forth, and potential paper Bitcoin, where that's happening. And it kind of eats up a lot of the news because you see the X company bought X millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. But then you have real like usage of what is the promise of Bitcoin, peer-to-peer digital cash. Like, and I've often said that that spark probably isn't going to happen in the United States, because you need that problem of it's really hard to spend money, and you need the solution. In the United States, it's not hard to spend money. You can get a credit card in a freaking second. Like you check one box on a website and it's like, you're approved. Here's your credit limit. And then you're just tapping to pay immediately. But in these other places that, you start to see these really cool use cases and case studies pop up, there is some spark and innovation happening. And like, again, water finds its level where there will be some sort of institutional coverage or custody probably, and then there will be the self-sovereign Bitcoin. But as long as the self-sovereign Bitcoin continues to improve and take those risks, then that's where I like remain, on that early adoption, like gradually then suddenly is going to be sooner than we think, because it's just really cool to see when it's all online and you can connect with people like yourself who are, in other parts of the world, seeing it in real time.
Yeah, totally. And there's some really interesting institutional stuff that's coming to El Salvador in the next year or so as well, since they just passed the Bitcoin banking law. I know that we'll have a couple of discussions on it. I'm not sure quite yet if there is going to be any announcements at adopting, but certainly some discussions on it. And I am very much in the camp of Grassroots. That's where my heart is. That's what I want to support. But it's naive to think that like the institutional adoption doesn't help with that, right? Like it does solidify in people's minds who might be skeptical, oh, this is something to take seriously, and that's okay too. Am I a part of that? Do I want to be a part of that? No, not necessarily, but I have respect for the people who have kind of kicked off that realm, including in the US. It's easy for people on Twitter to be like, oh, blah, 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 like whatever. But this is what happens with adoption. There are so many different elements to it. It is a complex thing. And whatever you think like might happen with adoption, you're going to be surprised probably, and that's okay. And we're going to look back and like think about like this conversation, for example, and laugh and be like, oh my God, we were so naive back then too,
No, absolutely.
In what ways do you think, Kiki, as around the world, I mean, you guys are leading the charge globally. In what ways do you think that people will be looking up to you or could learn from you? I mean, obviously there's like monetary policy, but just at a grassroots practical level, what would you say advice maybe you would give to other communities all around the world?
That's a good question. I feel like it's important to like have good support systems around you, including socially. Like it's okay to, have a meetup that doesn't necessarily have any educational elements to it and is just a time for people to hang out and build relationships. Relationship building is a huge part of this, and it's also, at least for me as a people person, like what's helped keep me like sane and be able to like talk through some issues and get to a better place in my work, if that makes sense. So having a good like support system and building relationships around you, I think is really, really, really important. And I mean, it ultimately comes down to like low time preference, right? Like you have to know that it's not like, cleaning your house. You don't just do it and then all of a sudden it's done. You're going to have to put in some time and some effort before you start seeing results. But then that first result, that second result, that third result is like so worth it. And in no time, once you have that momentum going, you are just going to be like, oh, this is normal now. And you're going to be the one passing on the torch to the next people.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And sometimes those meetups, they might have maybe one or two other people that show up. But then you just keep going, and another time there will be 10, 20, and next thing you know, you have like a really solid community that's showing up to, whether it's monthly or quarterly or whatever your cadence is. But just to re-echo what you said before, like Grassroots back in April was such an eye-opening experience for me of like seeing all of these people basically working towards the same goal, but just different ways in how they did it and how they were executing on it from every corner of the country and to your point, like even all over the world. It was really, really like inspiring to see. And I know you mentioned at the top of this call, I think before we hit record, but you were saying that you've been on a little bit of a tour yourself with all these Bitcoin conferences and things that you've been traveling to. You said you've hit 50, or you'll hit 15 by the end of the year?
Yeah, around 15.
Yeah, so tell me about that. What's that been like? Where have you been traveling to? What's the like kind of conversations that you're going into these events like with? What are you looking to get out of them and beyond just meeting other Bitcoiners?
Yeah, it's been amazing. The first one that I went to was in Colombia to the Medellin Bitcoin conference. That was cool because it was my first time in South America, but I also didn't realize how strong the community out there was, and some of, I guess, just like their priorities that I may have assumed would be similar to El Salvador, but were very different, and how they use Bitcoin and how they, unfortunately at times, but like they may use other options, but there's still like a very, very strong community of like Bitcoin only people, or people who are like Bitcoin focused but see, opportunities elsewhere, whatever it is. So that one was really, really interesting and definitely a highlight for me. I've been to a couple of events across Europe as well. I wasn't really sure what to expect with the European events because, again, everything that I saw was just stuff on Twitter and, conversations with friends who had been to other events. But I was like really, honestly, I felt inspired because I didn't realize like how many Bitcoiners were in Europe and how passionate they are and what they are building. And in spite of the fact that like their regulatory environments may not be perfect or whatever it is, there are so many more people, there are so many more Bitcoiners out there than we think that there are. Like, it's really encouraging and exciting. I guess what I've looked to get out of them changes per event. Like, for example, I went to the Bitcoin Film Fest in Poland as well. And that was very interesting because it was completely cultural focus, right? Like there's no kind of technical conversations or discussions going on there, except for if there was content in the actual films themselves. But that was cool to see how many people were like so focused in on this niche of the cultural aspect of the Bitcoin space. And I've also had the privilege of going to some of the Bitcoin Plus Plus events, which are extremely technical. And so obviously in those ones, like the priorities, the conversations are very different. Honestly, in those ones, sometimes they go way over my head because I am not a developer. I have really valued those ones because I think it's important to get out of your comfort zone. I think it's really easy for Bitcoiners to like find Bitcoin and get excited about it and then kind of like stay in their comfort zone and not push themselves to like learn a little bit more, be open to new perspectives. But when you're in a technical environment, even though I may not be able to like absorb all of the information or follow all of the, complex cryptography kind of thing, just hearing people talk about what they're building and what their ultimate goals with them are allowed me to open my mind to other solutions that I maybe would not have explored otherwise, like things like ARC, for example. To me, when I first heard of ARC, I was like, what is this? Is this relevant to me? I don't know what's going on here. I don't know if I should trust it. But it's come up at various events. And now I'm at a point where I'm like, oh, this is like, we need to be talking about this more. I want to learn more about this. And so it does change event to event, like what the priorities are, what you're learning about. But every event has been wonderful. Another highlight was in Barcelona, the Barcelona Ciphers Conference, I believe it was called. It was the first year they did it. It was pretty small as well, which was like maybe like 200 people in total. It was like a really good environment to be able to like chat with people. And that's cool because it's a lot of people who are speaking in Spanish, having conversations about Bitcoin in Spanish, but from a different perspective. It's not necessarily from like, a farmer's perspective in the hills of El Salvador. This is like legitimate. Sorry, I shouldn't say legitimate. That's the wrong word, but like just a developed world perspective, if you will. And so to see like the similarities and the contrasts of that was really interesting as well.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, contrary to popular belief, Twitter and the real world are not the same place all the time. But it's such an interesting paradox about Bitcoin because it is this internet money that lives 100% online, but then you have these physical like anchors, obviously with mining being like the core anchor, but then just meeting Bitcoiners. When people ask me, how do I get involved or what should I do to learn about Bitcoin? I always say, just go to your local meetup. And I know most cities, they probably just have a BitDevs. Yeah, it goes over like 99.99% of what's talked about at a BitDevs goes over my head as well. However, when you're not sitting in the actual Socratic seminar, it's not like that's how people talk all the time. You could ask your quote unquote dumb questions because there's no such thing. And you start to learn that even the facilitators, the things that they're talking about, they're generally very open about it, how they might not know. And like they're like, this is kind of what I'm taking away from it based off of XYZ. Like, they can explain a rationale and much better than I would be able to about those specific topics. But what's so cool about where we are in the Bitcoin adoption phase is there is a bit of everything for everyone. Like I just think of the meetups that we host in Austin and like the spectrum of topics from, just general adoption and more like Lightning Network. And we've talked about ARC as well in those meetups versus like a very technical bit devs versus our design club versus our ABC, which is just more general topics where, Bitcoin might come up because a lot of people who are going there are attracted to Bitcoin, but the topic might be about food or health or XYZ, like you name it, as long as it's kind of covered in that realm of freedom tech and that overall ethos. But no, I totally hear that. And that's it's always cool, like just finding that common ground with a Bitcoiner of like, oh yeah, well, this makes sense why we're friends now. It's a very easy starting point to at least start a conversation and build a rapport.
Yeah, definitely.
You know what's cool, guys, and I'd be curious to hear, Kiki, one of the things you mentioned is the importance of getting out of your comfort zone. I'd be curious to hear from your perspective on your advice on how. But what's cool about Bitcoin is that your cost of living goes down, and so over time, and so you're sort of slowly getting out of the rat race, and you have more time freedom and therefore able to follow your curiosities a little bit more. And you could go to the bit devs and it could be 99% over your head, but you might learn something, right? You could follow those curiosities. But what does that look like for you, Kiki? And what would your advice be?
Yeah, this question comes up often for me in conversations, but maybe framed a little bit differently from the perspective of like, oh, you're a female in Bitcoin, like how, like what would you say to other female Bitcoiners? And I think the answer to that and the answer to this question more broadly is like kind of the same. Firstly, I will say, as I've mentioned, I'm a people person, so it does come a little bit more naturally to me in my experience in restaurants, like serving hundreds of people a day. Like, yeah, I'm just the personality type that's a little bit more like that jives with a little bit better. So I will own that. That's fair. But I think it's like, well, what it comes down to for me is like, this might sound like a stretch, but a lot of it has to do with self-worth. I think it's like, it's a step in the relationship with yourself where you're like, I'm prioritizing my best interests and my growth and my, whether it's like financial growth or knowledge or spiritual, whatever it is. But like, you have to be able to want something better for yourself and also believe that it's out there and that you can find it and that you can achieve it. And unfortunately, I think that this is like the biggest thing that holds people back, no matter their background or situation, because, the times are a little bit weird. We can all agree, no matter what your perspective on things are, the times are a little bit weird. And especially with like the younger generations that I see, it seems like confidence and self-worth is kind of like going downhill. And so I think that's the biggest hurdle. From my perspective, how do you solve that? A part of it is like exposure therapy. Like you just have to like take the cannonball into the pool. But again, that's kind of my personality type. I get that. But if you have like, from what I can see, if you have like a little bit of hope, a glimmer of hope at all, then this is the right thing for you to pursue, right? Like we've seen, these stories of people who have come from very little and have this like optimism and hope. And this is something that people who visit El Salvador always note and really, really love. And that's what I loved about living there for 3 years, was in spite of the chaos of the world, people felt hopeful. And I didn't feel that when I left Canada in any way, shape, or form. But yeah, I guess my advice or what I would say to people is like, you don't have to think of it as this external thing. Yes, Bitcoin is code, and there is external factors that you will get into. But when you're in the beginning of your journey, it's actually like kind of an internal thing. It's like you having to kind of look at yourself in the mirror and say, what do I want for myself? Do I want to pursue something that might make my life even just a little bit better? And even if it doesn't, at least I walk away with the knowledge that I tried.
Yeah, I think it's that was great. I think it's
that was a banger of an answer. Thank you.
I think what is it, Shawshank Redemption, where it's like hope can be a dangerous thing. And I had a poster on my wall for a really long time from Ryan Holiday in the Daily Stoic of like confidence is what you know, humility is what you don't know, and then what fills those gaps is your ego. And Bitcoin, a lot of people will say, and it's, made the rounds, is like Bitcoin is the ultimate ego test because it just goes against so many of the like natural programming and understanding, quote unquote, that we're supposed to have. And like as cliche as it sounds, like showing up is half the battle because I got to a point where, I was going to meetups in Chicago and Austin and I didn't know anyone. So it was very easy for me to say, oh, well, if I just stay home and watch TV tonight or do anything else, then nobody will notice that I'm not there. And so like that's kind of a easy cop out, right? But then you start to go and you start to actually build relationships and you start to get some hope because you're like, oh, this was really fun. Like that was a really good conversation. This is somebody that I could, see myself becoming friends with or see myself working with in the future. Or it's just a cool person to like say, yeah, like I saw XYZ person at a meetup, which I know you said that the industry, like how big it is, but it's also how small it is too.
Yeah.
Like you're more often than not like max 3 degrees away from somebody who you follow on Twitter and you're like, wait, this person is pumping out sick content. So like that's the dichotomy and the paradox of it all, which is real. It's just so it's such a fun thing to talk about because it does ultimately come back to like the philosophical promise of Bitcoin, which that's what initially got me, down the rabbit hole of understanding sound money and how kind of the human behavior aspect of Austrian economics and opportunity cost. And then you start to realize like, wait, like this thing is actually kind of cool in terms of how the network supports itself and how you reach consensus and what these miners are doing versus the nodes versus just XYZ hodler. So I could not agree with that answer more. That was thank you. Thank you again. I feel like you're spitting bars in this in this recording so far.
Yeah, it's as you were talking, it just reminded me of something that I wanted to say as well, which is that like right now, if you're a Bitcoiner and you're like paying a lot of attention to what's going on Twitter right now, specifically regarding Bitcoin Core development, it can feel like really overwhelming. Like there are times where I'm like, you know what, I'm not going on today. Can't do it. Like I gotta protect my energy, kind of thing. But something that helps me understand, I guess, this a little bit more. And also this is maybe because I have been able to like meet some of these people in person and see that like these people are real people, is that everybody is actually kind of here, like, or maybe not everybody, but most people are here like with the same goal and the same hopes and dreams and ambitions, both for themselves and on a bigger perspective. And we may disagree on certain aspects or whatever, but at the end of the day, like, people are building towards this mission of hyper-Bitcoinization and ultimately of freedom and sovereignty. And it's okay to have disagreements. Let's not be, mean to each other about it, is what I would like to say to a few people. But like, it is generally like a pretty welcoming space as well. And it's okay to feel overwhelmed. It's okay to like take time and space. And the space is moving fast and accelerating quickly. And it's hard to keep up with everything that's going on. But like, you get to determine, like, it's a choose your own adventure. Like you're in control and like own that, that'll make you feel a little bit better than just being like, oh my God, there's so much.
No, I mean, at the end of the day, we're seeing, or at least we will see in my kind of perspective, the free market play out I'm not even going to pretend to understand the nuances of core knots and all the, op return stuff. Not going to go there. But all I will say is like, you got two sides and they have a open sourced, mechanism to plead their case. Let the best idea win. That's how Bitcoin works. Like, and ultimately that's where it will play out. And there will be stories and, lore that'll come as a result of it. But that's really what I continue to come back to of like, oh, it's pretty cool that like, people are being, getting in fights on Twitter like that. But that's a par for the course with Twitter. When I was, I wasn't following the block size war that closely. This one I'm following a little bit closer because I'm more ingrained. So I'm like seeing things play out and I'm like, oh, this is cool, like how it works and what the discourse looks like and why people think certain ways and then ultimately let the free market decide.
Yeah, 100%.
Jason, you're not on Twitter, so do you even like know what we're talking about?
Yeah, I very much know what you're talking about. But like you, it's it's over my head, and there's people I respect on both sides, and
No, Jason's doing it right. He's totally offline. I tell him every time it comes up, I'm like, dude, I wish I could do that.
Yeah, I love that for you.
Kiki, you are doing all this incredible work. What's kind of the bigger story that you hope your life and work will tell in the next, say, 5 or 10 years from now?
I like that question. This might be a cliche answer or maybe controversial. I don't know. But like, I want to have a family. I love working. I've always been like a hard worker and enjoyed work. And part of that is because I do work that I enjoy and always prioritize that. I'm getting to the point where like I want to settle down and have a family and raise kids. And whether or not that includes me working, I'm not entirely sure yet. But I hope to take like all of these experiences and these relationships and this educational knowledge and be able to pass that along to my kids and like raise kids who are also interested and want to be involved in this space and in the adoption of Bitcoin worldwide and in ultimately like empowering others. Because yes, it is going to happen very quickly and it is happening quickly, but like I don't think there's going to be like an end to this train. You know what I mean? It's not like we're going to wake up one day in 50 years and be like, all right, we did it. What's next? It's like there's always going to be iteration and innovation. And I hope that like maybe I'll have some good stories of my experiences that I can pass along. But yeah, ultimately, like I look forward to being a mother and passing along my knowledge to my children, to my communities, and serving my communities around me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Go moms.
Go moms, that's right. For sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is just my last question, and this is a more shorter term question on that one. So maybe even, I don't know if maybe we'll do something with the editing because I feel like that's a good question to end on. But I do want to ask about just like the upcoming Adopting Bitcoin and all the stuff that you're working on. And like, I mean, I sent a screenshot to Jason of one of the messages I got from you in a group chat earlier of the Circular Economy World Fair. So just tell us a little bit about that and, what you got upcoming in what is it, 8 weeks away or something along those lines. So I'll just shill away and let us know why people should hop on a plane and get to El Salvador.
Yeah, thank you. I just pulled my phone over because I've got a counter. We're 2 months, 1 day, and 3 hours away, according to my phone. So November 14th and 15th are the dates for Adopting Bitcoin. Like I said, it'll be the 5th year that we're doing the conference in El Salvador. We're doing it at the same venue that we did last year called Salamanca, and it is this like really gorgeous setting. I think that's what plays into like a very positive experience. I have not enjoyed the conferences that I've gone to that have been, in like kind of a hotel conference center type setting as much as I have the ones that are in nature, a little bit more open air. And obviously in El Salvador, we have much warmer weather. So it's nice to be able to actually enjoy that well in the conference setting. But yeah, we have a lot of cool things going on. The Circular Economy World's Fair is one of that I'm super, super, super excited about. The idea there being that, of course, El Salvador being like seen as this leader in the heart of Bitcoin adoption, but also there are so many other communities around the world that are popping up and are doing incredible work as well. And we wanted to find a way to showcase that beyond just like talk or a presentation. Those are super valuable as well. But again, bringing it back to that in-person experience. So we've set aside an area of our large expo hall for booths for Circular Economies to come and join us. So they'll have a physical space. Some of them might bring like books or products from people in their communities or whatever it is. But it's essentially a space to check in on what people are doing around the world. And so far, from what I can see, we've got representation from Africa, from Europe, of course, all across Latin America and North America and the Caribbean, and hopefully we'll see maybe somebody from Asia. So yeah, it's cool to see how circular economies are playing out, and we want to facilitate that a little bit more. So that's the goal there. And then we also have 50% English and 50% Spanish content this year, which we're really excited about. We've always offered translations, English to Spanish and Spanish to English. But this year, the idea was like our audience is 50% Spanish, 50% English usually. So like, let's empower this and play into this. And we have people coming from outside of El Salvador, from all across Latin America as well. And then speakers, of course, from the US, Canada, Europe, et cetera, just all speaking about different areas of adoption, of course. And then another thing that we did last year for the first time, which we'll be carrying into this year, is the Bitcoin para Niños area. So like kind of a kids zone and corner. And we have some amazing support on that from the Bitcoin Juniors Club and also from Mi Primer Bitcoin. And so it's not a daycare. The idea is not that you just like drop your kids and they play with toys and leave type thing. It's actual education. There's panels, there's presentations, there's videos. We're going to have some content for specified for families who might want to explore like homeschooling or solutions like that are relevant more to families. And yeah, it's kind of going back to that thing that you mentioned earlier, Jack, which was like there's kind of something for everyone. I don't want to say that we're a conference that is something for everyone, because we're not. And the reason that we're not is because we're Bitcoin only. So we're very like strict and specific about that. But the experience is kind of like, you can bring your whole family and everybody's going to get something out of it. We basically bring in all of these food vendors. We bring in farmers market vendors as well. You've got talks, workshops, expo booths, activities. We might even have ice baths this year. I'm not sure, hopefully. But it's like a pop-up village, and you can come for the day and you can learn, you can get super technical, you can be philosophical, your kids can learn about Bitcoin, you can bring grandma if you want. Like it's an entire experience that we are building, and I'm really proud of that, and I'm really excited for this year. And our theme is the network effect. So it's all about how we as a community come together and how we strengthen the network as a whole by working together and collaborating on adoption worldwide.
Sounds like a party.
Yeah. I hear the kids zone, and I think I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Scholastic Book Fair, but that's where my head goes.
Well, we also have an author's corner and a book signing table. So like kind of a little bit. I like that.
That's awesome. And if you need it,
Kiki.
I should also mention, there are a ton of side events as well. Like I can't even keep track of how many there are, and individual events that are happening around. So Bitcoin Historico is being run by the Bitcoin office in the Historical Center. There's a health and longevity summit that's happening the week before. There's a Noster Day that's being planned. My First Bitcoin is doing their unconference in San Salvador as well. We've got Adopting Bitcoin. There's a couple events coming up in the week after Adopting, and then the weekend following is another event called Economies Bitcoin, which is going to be in Berlin, the city in the mountains that has over 150 Bitcoin merchants. So you can come just for adopting if you want, but I would encourage you to explore all of the events that are happening because, yeah, there's a lot going on.
100%. Kiki, where do you want to send folks to learn more about you and what you're up to?
Yeah, I would love to say that I spend more time on Nostr than I do, but that would be a lie. I spend a lot of time on Twitter, probably is the most up-to-date platform for me. I'm at Bitcoin Baby, Babey, and like I said, focused on Adopting Bitcoin, which is at Adopting BTC on Twitter as well.
Amazing. Thank you, Kiki.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Yeah.